older from 12 weeks. We wanted 24, but that wouldn't fly.
Of course not.
With the legislature,
Right. Well, hopefully soon we'll be like Delaware, and we will be able to, Delaware will allow a titer test for a rabies vaccine. So that's why I asked if, when we're speaking in terms of the law, is if our states will finally accept a titer test, it might be better to do the longest lasting vaccine and detox from the mercury if you can get away with never vaccinating again once the law catches up with the science.
Titer testing is still very controversial. Remember, rabies is basically fatal for all mammals 100%. So there's a lot of resistance among various legislatures to allow titers instead of vaccinations, because what we know from our Rabies Challenge Fund study, which only studied one vaccine now, so the rest of the industry isn't happy if our vaccine is allowed to have a 5-year survival time, which we showed by Challenge. Why didn't we show Challenge study survival beyond 5 years? Because the USDA has the only source of live rabies virus for Challenge, and they didn't have any. When our dogs got to be 6 or 6.5 years old, there was nothing to challenge them with.
It's frustrating.
So we know that 5 years, our study with that one vaccine gave perfect challenge protection. So wouldn't we want to have the USDA license that vaccine for 5 years?
Of course.
Well, of course, but what do you think all the other companies are going to do about that?
They're not going to allow it. They're going to fight it.
Well, of course, because why would the other companies want to have everybody buy only their competitor's vaccine, right? It's a capitalist.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to move a little bit over to Merv asks a question. He says, having seen that it is difficult to prove malpractice and negligence, he's so right, in most of the cases, due to cited veterinary boards and hindrances by existing laws about veterinary practice, how can we convert a malpractice negligence case that we ourselves have witnessed but can't prove with or without an expert letter?
I have a feeling that one's, I'll try that one. Just so you know, it's malpractice and fraud are two really different concepts. Malpractice is, and negligence is kind of, you made a mistake. Fraud is really kind of, there's an intent to deceive some way or the other. But I will tell you, there's a couple areas I wanted to touch on here because I think it's important. In a lot of these cases, in most all veterinary malpractice cases, you do need an expert letter. And that's, it's not so onerous. I shouldn't say that. It's not so different as if if somebody repaired your car wrong, you would have to go to another mechanic and have that mechanic say, hey, they did the repair wrong. And so having a veterinarian review it is really something that you kind of have to have done before you can bring a malpractice case, because you need to have somebody in the industry. And even though like the states differ in how they apply their laws, the standards of care tend to be nationwide. It's just the application of particular laws are different in every single state. So that's important. And you definitely want to have a review by a veterinarian before you would bring a malpractice case, because you don't want to get into the case and then realize later that you can't prove it. So it's really important. But there are some situations where you would not need a veterinarian's letter. And I wish I could say that these were all made up, but they're not. Where a veterinarian has amputated the wrong leg. That is something that a layperson or a regular person on the jury would be able to see that, that veterinarian really messed up. In some cases, if it's a wrong dose of a medication, like say the veterinarian gave 10 times the amount of fentanyl they were supposed to give, killed an animal. Yeah, that's something a layperson can understand, and it may not need a veterinarian to describe. And even in some cases, like when, I know that, Scott probably did have an expert, but sometimes when a drug is contraindicated, so like if you get the drug fact sheet and see that this is not something that the manufacturer intended this drug for, that may be a situation where you don't need, a veterinarian expert, because you can see, right from the materials you have that this is not okay. But as far as like fraud, there's a couple kinds. You mentioned like there's a common law fraud, which is, kind of the kind of fraud you see somebody intended to deceive and did deceive somebody. And then there's also consumer fraud. And both of these can be tricky. Again, every state will differ, but generally it's something that if you had a consumer fraud case, more attorneys would want to take on, because most of these statutes, come with the award of attorney's fees. Because under the American system, unless there's a specifically contracted or is a statutorily allowed thing for a prevailing party, each party will pay their own attorney's fees. So if you have consumer fraud, there's an opportunity of getting attorney's fees in that case. So of course, it's something that you want to be able to bring if you can. And as for fraud, there's a potential for enhanced or punitive damages. It's more, this is something you see more commonly in vet cases. Examples maybe would include, if a veterinarian advertised that he had overnight services, or she, without ever intending to provide them. And sometimes veterinarians, we've seen do this because they want the business. They don't want you to take your animal to a overnight or specialty veterinarian that's going to, monitor them when, they could just, get that money and just keep them there, and without ever having to provide somebody to actually check on the animals overnight. And we've had situations where that's happened. We've alleged fraud, and we're allowed to bring the fraud cases, although they did settle, but, where the animal did die, overnight, without the monitoring. But there's, some other examples, I guess where I should probably say where fraud is really hard to prove. Either kind, it's often, it requires a high level of specificity, who said what, when, what was relied on, in the pleadings, and the judges are sometimes reluctant to allow fraud claims. You got to have clear and convincing evidence, of the deception, if it, like in Scott's case, like altering veterinary records, that's doing something very deceptive. That's, fraud, potentially fraudulent concealment, and, concealing the mistakes in hopes that you wouldn't find them. And then it usually requires fraud requires a false statement, made by the veterinarian or, the representatives at the clinic of a material fact or a deceptive omission, knowledge that the statement was untrue, or that the omission was important, to a material fact, the intent to deceive the victim, the reliance by the victim on the statement or the omission, and then the injury sustained by the victim as a result. In the context of a veterinary malpractice, case where you might have malpractice in addition to fraud, this is often done for financial or personal gain. Maybe they want to hide their mistakes, or they want to, just get the money that would otherwise be spent at a different vet clinic. But for consumer fraud, that's a often hotly contested area, when it goes to court, because it involves a deceptive business practice that causes a consumer of a business service, to suffer a financial or other losses. Like in our case, it would be the loss of their companion. Veterinarians, while they're very quick to say that your animal, and I please excuse me, Dr. Dodds, this is not all veterinarians, but many that we've encountered, have been quick to say the animal's worthless, after their actions resulted in the animal's death. And, I even had one in a deposition. I had one veterinarian tell me that he thought his services were akin to a mechanic working on a car. And it's just, you kind of don't know what to say in response to that. But, they're equally quick to claim, especially under consumer fraud, that the vets are part of like medical services or medical practices that may well be exempt, in a given state for consumer fraud laws. And some professions are exempt from consumer fraud, because consumer fraud was put into, it's a statute that says if you win, you can get attorney's fees. And again, check every state law is different, but at least here, if you win, you can get attorney's fees. And that's a big draw to take on a case with consumer fraud. But there are many professions, human medical doctors, lawyers, dentists, podiatrists, they are all exempt, from these consumer law fraud laws. Why? I don't really know, but I do know that, but maybe it helps to help write the laws. I don't know, but it's like a lot of times what's cited in the records is that, well, it's because these particular professions are regulated already. They have comprehensive regulation, and and that there's other common law remedies that would otherwise apply. And as all of us who've been in practice has seen the disciplinary boards for veterinary, they're really not quite as comprehensive as people may think. A lot of times, you're going to see many times a person or a particular veterinarian is going to go before that board before any actual action is taken. And, if I can say, like, one of the worst cases I saw, of a veterinarian was one that was, taking the medications that were meant for the animals, the drugs for the animals for himself. And that one, there wasn't any actual discipline. It was like a consent decree where they just, agreed that, we're just not going to, he agreed he's not going to practice, which is kind of baffling to the rest of us that are in actually regulated professions that, do fear, breaking the laws.
Did he keep his license?
What's that?
Did he keep his license? He just said, I won't do it?
Apparently he volunteered to be inactive, whatever that means. But well, I guess it's not even that. I don't think he has an active license because of, giving that up. But it's not to say that somebody might not try later. And,
Right.
and luckily there are, other things that can be done to prevent that as well. But it was just very disturbing to see that that's where the state boards, would go. And again, every state is different, but on the whole, this seems to be what's been observed. But, that's why, consumer fraud is somewhat harder to bring, in the professions, but there are some actions, that can be, something that you can bring into consumer fraud that may be applicable to veterinary practice, where even an exempt professional, lawyers, doctors, human doctors, and others, and I'm not saying veterinarians are necessarily exempted in these laws. It just means that every state is different and you have to check and be prepared that that's an argument they're going to make, whether or not it applies. Because even, like insurance brokers, some states say that they are subject to consumer fraud. Other states say they're not. So it's a big question mark for whether veterinarians would be subject to consumer fraud laws. But they are definitely subject to fraud laws if you can prove it. But if so, even so, there are actions, that would be commercial, or in publicly interfacing are actually subject to consumer fraud. So if they were engaged in fraudulent billing for services that they never performed, or advertising, like say they advertise on their website, hey, we offer overnight services, or, if they do this, or even say that kind of stuff to you, that's potentially, areas for consumer fraud, or, more so if it's publicly advertised because it's getting out to more people. But yeah, there's actually a case we're addressing, right now, where I was authorized to discuss this. So just know, attorneys we are barred from talking about cases unless the clients allow us to talk about it.
Yeah.
And we try to do it a little bit vaguely. It's not meant to, to deceive anyone. It's just meant to, I guess, protect as we're going through the process. But there, the plaintiff, or I guess the plaintiff's cat was stolen and taken to the vet. The vet was paid close to $1,000 to take out the microchip. The vet never scanned, or even, or didn't even record that, she scanned the microchip in the records. There's no indication anywhere of any attempt to scan this chip before she performed the surgery, collected a lot of money, and threw out the chip. We only found out about this because the plaintiff was also involved in a replevin case with the person who she thought stole the cat. Didn't know for sure, but brought that action, and made sure that, that like she's going to try to get this cat back. And then was able to subpoena the records from the veterinarian that showed that this was done. Otherwise, she would have never found out that this was ever done. Wow. And so we then, brought a suit to sue the veterinarian who took out the chip, because everybody knows that microchips are meant to reunite animals that are lost and stolen with their owners. But it's interesting, the judge in the lower court actually rejected the consumer fraud argument because he said that there was no direct representation made to the plaintiff that the chip was being taken out. And it's like, well, that's the whole point. The cat was brought in by somebody else who stole the cat and paid the veterinarian close to $1,000 to take it out. Of course, they're not going to call her and tell her that.
What?
It doesn't. But so we're appealing it, on public policy concerns, because there's a lot of states, Illinois included, that if an animal's dangerous or vicious, or even animals being adopted out of shelters or sold, have to be microchipped. So there's a real interest in keeping these chips in the animals that are there. And there was no medical indication, to take this chip out. The chip wasn't causing cancer, hadn't migrated to a spot that would have required removal. There was no reason whatsoever. And that's where it's kind of difficult when you see how these judges will treat the cases just the same as, and the judge actually, it's funny, he had a conversation with the opposing counsel and I and said, I really think you should just take this to the disciplinary board, and you just have to sit back and smile and say, I think this is really where we need to kind of go. We have to go through the courts. because the disciplinary boards are not going to take any real action. But I think, here, removing a microchip's like removing a VIN number from a car. I mean, if you take your car to the mechanic and say, hey, while you're fixing the brakes, can you just, shave off that VIN number? Of course that's wrong. All of us know that's wrong. But it's strange that the courts, put this like very high bar on fraud and things like that. I mean, hopefully we'll know, by the end of the year, if the appellate courts will take a look at that seriously and say, hey, I do think there's some fraud here. But, this another area where fraud comes up a lot is in dentals. And it's something you got to watch because, in the industry standard for dentals, for general practice veterinarians is actually probably too low. It leads to a lot of jaw breaks for extractions. Some veterinarians don't do proper x-rays before extracting. So it's just, there's really things you got to watch, and how they advertise this, like, oh yeah, we're number one dentist. It's like, well, wait a minute. I think to say you're a specialist, if you call yourself that, you really got to you got to have board certification to do that. But you have to watch kind of the language that's like, well, we're focused on it. We're interested in it, those types of things, because it's somewhat deceptive, to consumers who are bringing their animals in thinking they're going to get this, the best treatment or the treatment that they expect. And then something that Dr. Dodds touched on, which I thought was really important earlier, is that a lot of these veterinary offices are owned by major corporations, like the small veterinarian who cared deeply about the business and practice, and that they are far and few between now, because as they are phasing themselves out of the practice, they're retiring. The companies, NVA, Mars, Banfield, they're all coming in to purchase these clinics. And another area that you need to kind of watch out for as a consumer of these services is that the veterinarians, many of them are on what's called a commission-based or pro-sal. So what you don't realize is when you're going in there, when you think the veterinarian is going to be your trusted fiduciary, you're relying on them to find out the best treatments for your animals, they're upselling you because they want you to buy more services. Yeah.
I used to have a vet friend of mine, and she quit because the vet that took over constantly had her in there telling her she wasn't selling enough flea and tick medication.
Yeah.
And she said, I'm a doctor. That's not what I'm here to do, is sell your products. I don't think this pet needed it. So it was really sad, but she ended up quitting. I was so happy that she quit because she said, I'm not here to, he hired an office manager and she was in charge of finding out how much sales were done. Not even anybody even related to veterinary medicine. She was the one that told the vet how much drugs she had to sell or what she had to sell. And my friend would get in trouble when she didn't keep up with that. So you're right about that. It's sad. It's so very, very sad. On that, when you were talking about that, I think I have back talk on my thing. So I'm trying to turn my phone off because I don't know what's going on. I was trying to keep track of things. Sorry about that. Dr. Dodds, just out of curiosity, I know every area is different, but when you had mentioned, not you, but when Anna had mentioned about the veterinarian charging $1,000 to remove a chip, doesn't that seem high?
It seems high, especially if the chip, as she said, hadn't traveled anywhere.
Yeah. It made me wonder if the vet knew that the cat was,
the pet was
and almost like I'll pay you $1,000 just to be quiet and remove this, because that seems awfully high to remove a chip. I'm just saying, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to put anybody on blast, but it kind of seems a little high to me. I'm just putting that out.
Just to be fair, it was close to 1,000. But it's it's. Yeah, I agree. I mean, because it's hard to tell what the norm is, because all these services are now going to be probably the same price, very high everywhere.
Yeah. On many things, the age of the pet, having the surgery, the comorbidities the pet might have. Maybe it's a 19-year-old cat with diabetes and high blood pressure, So this is complicated, right? But obviously, a cat wouldn't likely be stolen, right?
Right. We
had a case years ago where a intramedullary metal pin was put in a back leg of a dog, to help the break across the femur and the tibia. And what happened was the metal pin traveled and ended up going into the abdominal cavity and through the heart. And on the x-ray, you could see this pin right through the dog's heart. Well, the surgeon involved was amazing. What she did was she anesthetized the dog and she pulled the thing out of the heart very, very slowly. And when she got to the first edge of the heart, she sealed it with surgical glue. And she kept gradually moving the pin out until she sealed the other end, and the dog lived.
Oh.
Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
That wasn't fault. That was just a totally weird thing about these pins. We're very careful about them. You know, years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, I had a case where a client of ours went in for a parvovirus and horrible bloody diarrhea, and it perforated the bowel. Well, it was fixed, but it dehisced. Okay, so it broke down, and the whole body just went into peritonitis and whatever. A second surgeon was brought in from out of state to fix it. And in the records, that second surgeon said the bowel was perforated because the animal's bowel lining was so weak. When they took biopsies to see what was going on, they perforated the bowel. So that was a medical accident, right?
Right.
Well, the client was billed for the second surgery, a huge amount of money.
Wow.
And I said, something doesn't fit here. Now, this was a 24-hour clinic with specialists as well. So I said, show me the records of what happened. And I noticed that on page 6 of the record, where it said that the bowel surgery was done again, the thing was out of alignment. In other words, everything was printed down to about 2/3 of the page, and the last third was 1/4 of an inch out of alignment. I said, this doesn't look right to me. So seeing it was a 24-hour hospital, I asked her to call there and say she needed a copy of the pet's records for her insurance claim. And sure enough, the actual page had been put back in.
Oh.
Okay, showing what really happened.
What really happened.
Okay, so we got the out of alignment was out of alignment because something had been cut out. Okay, so we got the thing that had been cut out, put back in. And what I did and what she did was send a complete copy of what we found to the head of this corporation to wipe out the bill. And if the bill wasn't wiped out, a copy was to go to the California Veterinary Medical Board.
Yeah.
This.
Wow.
Good for you. But
God,
gosh, dang it. It just makes me so angry, you know, because it's like a double whammy, right? She's going to pay for their mistakes so they can not look guilty. Yeah. And so, because if you offer to pay, then you look guilty. And so you charge them. Oh my gosh. It's just, this stuff just drives me up.
I got to add, I have a question for Dr. Dodds, really, because here's something that's, oh, go ahead. Sorry. It's scary practice.
Upstairs told us how to do it, right? Get the record, wait, and because the person who changed it obviously put it back, right? Because they were afraid that they were doctoring a record. And so the actual record got revealed.
They were just hoping that no one would ever find out. Good for you guys.
Well, for Dr. Dodds, I had a kind of a question that's come up a few times, like people, and this is one of the reasons why I really believe that we have to have the compensation for the loss of an animal to be something really more than it is, not a market valuation, more towards the actual valuation, actual value to owner, because this is now, I think the second or third times I've seen this in my practice is there's a concern that the veterinarian allowed an animal to die simply because the cost of bringing them back to health would have been enormous. And I tell you this because I've been practicing and I've done a lot of animal cases probably in the last 12 years. I've actually seen many improvements. I know I told Scott I would be sure to mention this because it has gotten better. It's not where it needs to be, but it is improving. But one of the things that's come out is, like, you know, the courts have put their valuation on animals. You know, they say market value versus, you know, some actual value. I mean, most of them have recognized that clearly animals are not tables, toasters, or chairs. You know, they're different. They're sentient beings. They have thoughts, desires, feelings beyond, you know, beyond what we would ascribe to them. You know, they have their own lives, but, you know, we're lucky to be a part of them. But one of, in all these practice years, like, I'd never seen a cryptorchid removal where there was, you know, a cutting of the prostate. But I have seen them more recently. And I think this may be something that happened as a result of COVID. But I say this because bringing these animals back to health after doing something like that, this is a pretty serious, and I know Dr. Dodds can probably talk more about what that is, but a current case I have, you know, this happened, And, the cost to bring these animals back to health was at least $10,000. And the people who went to surgery or had the surgery done by someone who, performed it and, said, yeah, everything was fine, no problem. And then the next day, the dog couldn't urinate and had problems, and they brought him back in. And they're like, hey, there's a problem here. They're like, oh, no, I'm sure it's fine. But, after, X number of hours, they're like, well, you need to go see a specialist. They went, and then that's where they found out through the testing done at the specialist that the surgeon had taken out the prostate instead of the cryptorchid testicle. And to get even any kind of modicum of relief, the veterinary hospital demanded, like, you're going to have to pay up front $10,000, and the people didn't have it. And so it's basically, my concern is that if we don't get these valuations up to a reasonable point, veterinarians may then just allow your animal to die in the back to say, like, well, you know what? I'd rather just pay him $250 or a couple $1,000 rather than pay the $10,000 it would cost to bring him back to health. And how do we get around that? I mean, it's devastating.
That's a scary thought.
But Anna, we're talking about the 10 or 15% of cases, as Scott said when he introduced the whole concept, that 85% of veterinarians do the right thing.
Right.
80%
yes. Yeah.
probably of other health professionals do the right thing.
And I will say, one of those cases, the veterinarian, they did do the right thing, and they did make good on what was wrong. But in these other cases, I have real concerns because, the courts will very often allow you to get the money. I mean, to even in Georgia, case law out there, it says that if the money required to bring your animal back to health, you'll get. But what if that animal is under the care of a veterinarian who made the mistake or screwed up, and they're the ones controlling whether your animal lives or dying? And I don't want them thinking like, hey, you know what? This is just cheaper
to let it die. Oh my gosh. I wish I could say that no vet would ever do that, but we know different. I based on what we're talking about right now, I want to get to Susan's question. So Susan cites a case, she says, that happened in California where there was an intrinsic value for a dog in a veterinary malpractice action that led to $30,000, and it was a jury awarded case. She wants to know how can we get back to that, or is that just kind of a one-off?
I think that we may want to look real closely at that to see if there were other factors. Usually if there's any kind of fraud involved or something like that, that's a higher award. But I agree wholeheartedly that these animals should be worth far more than, I adopted my cat Tuxie for like $50. Okay. I would mortgage my house, to bring Tuxie back to health. I mean, there is absolutely nothing I wouldn't have done. So to actually think that, it's pure hypocrisy, for a veterinarian. I mean, and one thing we got to do is stop calling them pets. They're companion animals, and their names, and they have, obviously greater value to us than really anything we own. So to say that, for a veterinarian to say that, oh, after you've spent, whatever amount of money on your animal, thousands of dollars sometimes, to say like, oh, your animal's just worthless. That's just pure hypocrisy. And
no, it absolutely is. And I see that a lot, where if you're paying me money to save your animal, then he's a companion and he's great. But if I screw up, then he's just a pet. And you're right. We can't do that.
One of the things that comes up, and we use this sometimes kind of to, I guess, irritate, if you will, the other sides, and actually to put it out there, is when they argue about market valuation. We ask them, say, because there's a difference. Some states adopt market value. So like when your car gets crashed up, you can't go pay somebody $10,000 to repair your car if you can get a new car for $2,500. They say, sorry, you get $2,500, go get yourself the same or similar car. But with animals, that's not how we view them. And everyone knows that. Everyone knows that, even if they claim they don't. So when it comes to that, in the court cases, we argue that intrinsic value. Some judges get confused. They think, oh, well, that's just to avoid nominal value. Not really. Everybody knows, you blow up my car in front of me. I'll be mad you took my car away and blew it up, but I'm not going to be devastated like I would if you did that to my animal, to my companion. Now, so when we have to just get rid of that legal fiction, about how the courts treat these cases. And then second, when you get value to owner, you need to actually allow the people to establish that this animal was everyday part of their life. This wasn't just a dog they staked out in the yard and said, I hope they bark at the kids so they don't come running on my lawn. No, this was my everyday companion. And in many courts, even in Illinois, there are courts that will allow you to establish that. And that's where you get this, these amounts of money. Like, it's just very hard because there's no specific, formula for doing so. But I add this because when they start to argue, oh, well, it's market valuation, I usually ask opposing counsel, do you know how much it costs to clone a dog? Because they often say, oh, well, you can just get another dog. It's like, well, no, if I want the same closest possible genetic dog, I say, well, then you're going to look at cloning. And cloning is usually about $50,000. So, if they want to argue market value, fine, let's argue market value. But it usually, there's a process involved. So if somebody is actually considering, bringing a case, you know what? Freeze the cells. It's a couple $100. Freeze the cells. Have it available. Make it part of your case. Because if nothing else, you may force the industry into accepting these actual valuations. Because, that's really where the pressure is going to come. Because the law is the last to the party every single time. They are the last to make the changes. The legislature is the last to take on the responsibility. You can push and you try, but it's really public sentiment that has to change first. And that's where places like Joey's Legacy come in, because this is where the change happens, is right here, where people start asking their veterinarian, hey, if you mess up and my animal dies, are you going to deny me the value of the bond that I have with my animal? And I mean, I would love to see veterinarians, the consumers actually having a choice. If there was a veterinarian that was compassion certified or something, that had signed a contract with a place like Joey's Legacy that said, hey, if you go to court on this case, or if I do something that I made a mistake, I'm not going to challenge that you have a right to valuation for the bond you had. I would love to see that.
That's a really, really great idea, actually.
But that's where it's going to come from, places like this, from Joey's Legacy, from places outside of the court, because the court, again, last to the party. They are the last to pick up on the social changes and last to really implement what has to be done. And the veterinarians are going to have to, really step up and say, hey, I would like this, because when enough people are treated badly enough in the courts or denied their justice rights, which is, again, obviously, Scott wouldn't, he wouldn't want that. Whether he was given Joey or $1 million, he would take Joey in a heartbeat. Everyone knows that. The whole point of the compensation or changes in the court is to make sure that these standards are better for other animals coming forward.
Right.
Because when they're built, when these companies or corporations are taking over, they don't care. They care about money. Money is important to them. And that's the only thing that's going to make it change. But you need doctors like Dr. Dodds who can step up and say, yeah, that's something I would sign because I know it's important to these people. And it also would give them a competitive advantage, because if I'm going to go, would I go to Compassion Certified or some regular vet? No, I'm going to Compassion Certified because I know that they understand.
That's got to be on your list, Scott. I don't know how many vets we can get to sign it, but I think that we can get enough. That's where I would take my dog. Yeah. I'm going to get to a couple of these questions pretty quickly because we're coming up on the hour and we don't want to keep you too much. But Kathy, says she took her kitty in for a neuter chip and his ears and teeth cleaned in 2012. She recognizes it's been a while. But when she picked him up, she later found him laying in a pool of blood and she rushed him back. The vet told me his kidneys were bad and he needed to be euthanized. And she says that she lied to her because she took him to another veterinarian who said he was harmed but didn't say how. I called an attorney who wouldn't take the case. I took him to 3 separate veterinarians. One told me his penis had been sliced off. Mm-hmm. He suffered his entire life. He had to routinely go from injections and injections. One specialist told me he had lots of scar tissue from his injury. I finally had him euthanized in March 2021. I received his records from the first vet, but they were scrubbled. I'm at such a loss without him, and I feel so guilty. I know this has happened a long time ago, but I didn't know what else to do until I found Scott. Is there something she can do?
Well, I mean, I think she could talk about what happened. That's pretty horrifying. A lot of times the disciplinary bodies have a certain period of time that they can look at, and Dr. Dodds may know this better, but it's usually a shorter window. But I mean, honestly, the biggest, and this is where we're running into issues with the veterinarians. Many of them want, they'll offer a settlement, but they want you to keep quiet. They want non-disparagement. They want, not only do I not want you to say anything bad about us ever to anyone, I want you to never talk about this case to anyone ever. And only then will they give you the money. And so a lot of times the settlements that are coming out now are, one, because of COVID and the chances of having a jury trial are kind of pushed off into the future a bit. They've been lower than, traditionally, but also when you're looking at these settlement agreements, many of them will come with a non-disparagement and a non-disclosure. And that can be devastating to the people coming after you because, you get your settlement, but then the next people have no idea, and you are contractually barred. They can sue you if you talk about their case then going forward.
But that happens
So
in every area of law. That happens
Yeah, it is
in
every area. Yeah.
Yeah.
In many areas. But that's something that for purposes of getting a standard changed or getting the industry changed, it can be very difficult. But yeah, it is true. It's something that happens with human medical providers. And that was scary when I learned that as well. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. We have another, so I'm going to just wrap that question up for you. I think you guys are absolutely right. You just need to tell your story, because that's what you have at this point, right? So, and which is more valuable really than probably going through trying to get through a malpractice case that's so long ago and losing it and possibly not being able to do anything. Telling your story is probably going to be the best thing you can do.
And the statutes of limitations usually on these cases, you have to check every single state, is different in these, but a lot of times it's, it's only a couple of years, you can bring a case for professional malpractice. So you have to kind of act more quickly, but so long as you're telling the truth, so long as you're telling the factual basis for things that happened, you can tell what happened. And if you don't have a contract that says you can't say it, you can talk. And that's really Joey's legacy is what's promoting this stuff and, is getting the word out there about what's going on. Because, I mean, come on, how many people know that their veterinarian is commission based? I just learned that from doing the cases. I had no idea this is how it was done.
Wow.
Well, some of
them, not all of them. You're correct. Yeah.
So this.
Anna, and also the practice knowledge today, years later, is different. So how things were done in 2012 have to be looked at versus how they're done now in 2001.
Yeah,
now
that makes sense.
A good story. We had a case of a greyhound that we had adopted as a family companion, and the dog escaped and ended up in the pound. So my husband, who's a retired attorney now, we went to the pound to get the dog released and whatever, and there was a big to-do, and we had to go to court to oversee, that person said, I'm the new owner. I can do whatever I want. I want the dog put to sleep. And we said, no. We say that if you can't keep it, it has to come back to us. Mm-hmm. So we went there and we were talking quietly, we thought, at the back of the courtroom. There was nobody in there but the attorneys and whatever, and the few attorneys in the front. Finally, the judge says, wait a second. My court is being interrupted by all this whispering down there. What is going on? And my husband said, Your Honor, I'm so sorry. We're concerned about this case. And he said, well, who's that woman with you? I said, well, she's my wife, but she's the plaintiff. He says, come into my court. Come into the chambers. Well, I'm shaking, right? He goes in there and he says, okay, I love dogs. What's the problem? So Charles explained it. He said, fine, you win.
Aww, that's amazing. That's good. That's good. We need we need more wins. The more wins we get, right, the better it's going to be for everybody. And that's what's happening. That's why having attorneys and vets, Joey's legacy doing this, it's making a difference. I do want to get into some of these questions because it's just, I know people wait so long to come on here. So really quickly, Anna, this one is for you, and she wants to thank you for taking this. What if we can't prove the negligence because the bad actors falsified the paperwork so that it does not look like it's negligence?
That is the hard part, and that is where it gets very tricky. I mean, and just for everybody out there, the best practice when you go to the vet every time, ask for the records. Keep your own sets of records. Ask for them. If they say, oh, it's going to take some time, that's fine. I'll wait. I'll wait right out here. No problem. I'll wait. Just keep your own records. But when you see that, you can usually bring them to another veterinarian to review. I understand it's hard. It's a very congenial group. Veterinarians tend to get along with each other, not like lawyers, right? Where you can get them to testify against each other pretty easily. But veterinarians, are a likable group, so they don't tend to want to testify against each other. But you usually can if you bring the records in and you bring some of the past records. And and if you're lucky and your animal survived, or if maybe some subsequent records, but the veterinarians can usually see if something doesn't look right. You can also, if they're computer records, and there have been some attorneys, some animal law attorneys who have been able to do this, is they've been able to do like a forensic analysis. It's extremely expensive, but you can, if they have computer records, if you're suing them and there's a real reason to believe that these records were altered or doctored, there may be evidence in the computer programs to show when these documents were altered. It may or may not. It's kind of it's a little tough, but but it's in there. But you're going to have to rely on circumstantial evidence there, and that's the hardest part, is that you sometimes do not know if they are in complete control of the veterinarian. That is an area that, it's out. And I think Dr. Dodds may know more about how this could be kept, but every once in a while they have to keep certain records for the state. And this is where we found some of our information is like the drug logs. So if they're administering controlled substances, they have to have licenses and they have to account for every drop of that. So it's really important that, you get those drug logs, you check them, you see if there's discrepancies. But it is a problem. And that actually may be for Dr. Dodds. So
Yeah.
No, it's that is, it's correct what you said.
Awesome.
Difficult, very
difficult, but there's a few ways. Once you dive into it, you probably could find some stuff.
When you leave is very important, or certainly within the next day, because people have not assumed that there was anything wrong. They're going to give you, when we see referral patients, we write up everything. We tell people verbally, and we write up everything and type it and send it to them within the next morning. Mm-hmm. So they have a record, everything we did and everything we recommended, and they've signed when we've estimated the cost and whatever. They've signed and approved that we know what we're doing and they know what we're doing.
Perfect.
The signs the estimate and what we're doing. Okay.
That kind of helps us into the next question from Kathy. She says, 1 week ago, her yellow lab was failed by 3 different vets at my clinic. I'm assuming this is the same clinic. Kathy, maybe you can help us out. Before they passed us off to an emergency clinic where unfortunately it was too late and I had to let her go. To this very moment, we have not heard one word from our clinic. What are they thinking? And do I call them? Like, why wouldn't, they have to give her the records or call or do something, right?
They have to give her the records if she asks for them. Yeah.
Okay.
She needs to go there and wait until she gets them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because
get the police.
It's in the Vet Practice Act of most of the states, and I think I can't speak for every state, but most of the states, if you give a written request, an email, anything, most of the time they'll do it verbally as well. But if you send an email and say I want the records, they have, if you're the client, they have to give you the records.
Okay. And then we have one more question and then we'll kind of do a quick little thing. So Sherry wants to know, what can we do to help the new vets who entering the world of healthcare to be more open to actual healthcare and not sick care? That's such a great question, Dr. Dodds. Anybody?
That's really important, because wellness care is as important as illness care. And everybody should take their healthy animal in for a wellness exam, after the puppy, kitten, whatever. And then at a year, when they've reached puberty, whether they're spayed or neutered, doesn't matter. So you have a baseline of everything, a physical examination, a blood test, a urine test, maybe a saliva test, whatever has to be done, okay, to do that. So you have a record, and you're comparing that animal to himself or herself every year thereafter on the wellness exam. And that's much more accurate diagnostically than looking at the wide range of Chihuahua to St. Bernard, okay, which obviously doesn't apply to the animal that's a Chihuahua and is not a St. Bernard, right?
No. I think we had touched on this in one of the other roundtables about ethics classes. And I really think that veterinary schools need to have more ethics classes. When I spoke with one of the veterinarians, he said that it was, I think, Scott, you might remember, it was something like a 2-unit class and you didn't really have to take it and you kind of didn't really learn anything in it. But I think that would be helpful too for our new vets learning ethics and learning how to communicate. Because I know Dr. Dodds and Scott and I have talked about it a lot. I've worked for so many veterinarians. There are really great veterinarians out there. But one of the things that veterinarians aren't taught is how to communicate with their clients and how to say, I did this and this happened. And so a lot of times they hide and they don't want to call you back and they don't want to communicate, and that becomes the problem. And it's just a kind of a horrible thing. So there's a lot of stuff I think that new vets coming out can be taught in veterinary school that would help. One would be how to run a business, which they don't know.
They don't teach applied clinical pathology. In other words, they get a printout with 45 pieces of answers of numbers. They have no idea what it means in terms of applying it to the particular patient. We don't teach applied clinical pathology. Okay.
It's critical thinking. So I know. Okay. So unfortunately we're not going to, we're up at our little over an hour, guys. So we're gonna have to kind of wrap this up. But to Anna, real quick, if there's one thing you can pick that would help clients when they come to you, maybe two things, I don't know, that we could do quickly. What is it that you want to see in your office to take a case?
I want to see all the records. I need them to have all their records, and I need them to have a summary of what happened, kind of, because it's hard when you're working through grief. It's hard to explain to somebody. And I guess maybe the third thing is realistic expectations for this point in time. Do I think it's going to be different how animals are valued in the future? Absolutely. And this is one of the paths to get there. But if your sole reason for suing the vet is to get compensation, it's not probably going to be the best route. There are other routes you can go towards to kind of work out the grief. You can, come in and, you don't even have to sue the vet. You could always go on social media. You could put your case out there. And so long as you're telling the truth, you're not saying something defamatory, it's okay. But for evaluating a case, we need to have the records. And that's not for us. It's because our first step is to contact a vet. It's usually, either somebody from Joey's Legacy or someone else who may, be able to take on a case or to review the records. That's the most important thing, because we need to see if there was something in there, that would have been a breach of the reasonable standard of care and damages resulting from that breach. And then the timeline, or the time, a summary of what happened, is what allows us to quickly see if there are other avenues of potential relief, like fraud, whether it be, consumer fraud or common law fraud, or sometimes, we'll bring a tort claim of conversion, so if they performed an action that they were not authorized to perform, which some states, will allow. So, I mean, whether there were, sadly, in some cases, Humane Care for Animals Act violations, or, violations that may raise to a different level, like taking, other areas we'll leave, out for now. But that time, the timeline in your summary of events written for the attorney to review is what allows us to see what kind of case you have. So those are the things we really need, but understand that, it's still, a moving target. And with every case, even the cases, you're certainly not going to win them all, but you're going to try. But every time you bring it to light, that's something that helps. It shows people, hey, here's what happened to me, and here's what the courts are going to allow. And with enough people bringing that forward and enough people being aware, that, hey, there's limits on this that I didn't even know existed. Because the number one thing that I hate, when I get a call, is that every single person is horrified to learn that they are not allowed the full scope of the grief and damage that they suffered. Not just, not because they want to get rich. No, that's not it's that they feel devalued, and they feel like that their emotional bond should not have been devalued the way it was, and it shouldn't be. But knowing that going in, that this is the courts have not given the full value for this, and that your case is something that may well be used to fight for it, is something that would be helpful also to know, that this is what we're trying for, we're striving for. The damages are not where they need to be right now, but they're going to get there. I really, truly believe that.
Yeah, I do too. Dr. Dodds, what can pet owners, guardians do to help protect them from veterinary malpractice? Is there something they can do?
Well, they have to find out. Sometimes if you're finding a new veterinarian, you've got to scope out the place first. Read the reviews about them, even go and meet them if you want, see if you have a good body language, good experience and whatever. And as far as what do we look for, examining it for looking at exactly what Anna said. We want all the records, and we want the pet guardian to tell us what they believe and and then we can tell them whether it's meritorious or whether it's not, or whether it's hearsay, or whether it's forget it. You just have to get over your grief and give them some grief counseling suggestions.
Can pet guardians look up a veterinarian to see, where can they go to look to see if a veterinarian has had other cases against them?
You can go on Google and you can look at all the different things, and the way you can go on and get the actual history of that veterinarian's record, even before the person was a veterinarian. Have they ever been to jail? Have they ever been arrested? Whatever. You have to pay for that, okay, when you get to that level. That information is available. And if you find a clinic that's consistently got 4 and 5 gold stars, that's a good place.
There's one other place too. You can go on the disciplinary board sites. understand that if a complaint is made and no action is taken, that complaint basically goes away, and you may never even know about it, even if you're the complainant. But if there is an actual act, registered for that particular veterinarian, heads up, it's available on each of the state boards. Should have a website where you can search for it. And you should be able to find that information under the particular veterinarian and or under the clinic as well, with the veterinarians noted. So that is available through the state websites. But be aware that there may be many complaints that not much has happened on, but that's probably a subject of a different roundtable. But it is out there. Yeah.
But it's just, we want to try to prevent malpractice, so if we could keep our pets out of these places that are being continually, I know in Joey's case, the veterinarian had been in trouble before and Scott had no way of didn't know. And so those are kind of some things that we need to do. So Scott, what are we going to do to get these laws changed? Where are we? What are we doing? What do we need?
Well, I totally agree with Anna. I think by 2025, we're going to see a major change in the landscape for veterinary justice. We're starting to see cases that include fraud, misrepresentation, concealment, and that are settled out of court. Some even include emotional damages. We had one case in I think one of the southern states where the demand was for $10,000. The insurance came back with $5,000, and they settled at $7,500. And the insurance adjuster actually told our attorney that I don't want this one going to court because I'll pay the complainant as much as she wants, to a limit, of course, and just to avoid putting this in front of a jury, because I think he thought they'd get clobbered in court. So, it's not just about economic damages anymore. It also includes non-economic damages in a lot of our cases that we're seeing.
Right.
So it's just a matter of time. We're working our way in that direction. We've got legislation in several states that'll run its course and take as long as it's going to take. But we'll get a new bill that enhances the perception and the value and the way society looks at our companion animals. And it's just a matter of time. We just gotta live to see it.
Sounds like my doorbell just got rang. No, it's my dog barking because the doorbell's ringing apparently. So I know that we need to get this documentary made, and here's my little culprit who's gonna steal the show from you guys. Sorry, he's so darn cute, isn't he? So we need to get the documentary made. That's what we're working on right now, so that we can get more people to know about this, more people involved. But we need to raise money. So if you're listening to this, Scott, tell us a little bit where we are with the documentary.
I was hoping to have Jerry and John was supposed to join us tonight. We'll try to maybe get that for Wednesday night. We have one coming up in 3 nights again.
Okay.
So basically, Jerry met with John in Florida this weekend. Very good news. John has already begun the preliminary interviews with a couple of people down there for the documentary. We've raised about $25,000 so far. Pardon me. And we have an estimate near 100,000, hopefully maybe less, but we just need some more help. So we count on our members and their families and friends and animal advocates all over to try to help us get this made, until it's real simple. As long as vet boards continue to do what they do, which is basically nothing, we have to expose whatever we can in the veterinary profession. And again, it's a small subset of practitioners, but we have to expose in order to educate and enlighten all of the uninformed pet guardians, pet parents out there that need this education. They need to be forewarned, so they're forearmed before they go to a new veterinarian. That's all this is about, educating. Well, we can't count on them. We have to take matters into our own hands, and this is how we do it.
Yeah. I said the last roundtable that we did, I had mentioned that it's hard to get people to listen and donate to this documentary because a lot of people think this can never happen to them because they love their veterinarian and that's great. And they should, I hopefully love their veterinarian. But for me, I think a lot of people have been victim of veterinary malpractice and don't even know it.
Right.
And they don't even know it. So there's so many people out there who just have no idea. And that's part of the reason why I'm so involved in this organization is because Anna, when you talked about the cat that got his leg cut off, the wrong leg cut off, I actually witnessed veterinary malpractice, and that is how it was done. And I was a vet tech at the time, and I was really young. I had no idea what to do, or even if I didn't even know what malpractice was. I think it was 18, and he never looked at that X-ray. Never. He never ever looked at it because the X-ray was done at another vet hospital. And then the cat came in and it was kind of a friend of a friend kind of situation. And so he just did the surgery. The X-ray was never even up. Wow. And then halfway through realized he had the wrong leg and there was nothing that could be done. So, and nothing ever happened to him or anything. But my point is, I think veterinary malpractice happens and has happened to a lot of people, and maybe not at the extremes of a dog dying or a cat getting their leg cut off, but it does happen. And I think it also needs to get a little bit broader. Dr. Dodds, I am really upset at the number of animals that are given rabies vaccines when they're sick, because that scope is, that to me, that should be veterinary malpractice. And because the vial says only for non-healthy dogs without, I just had a client's dog get a rabies vaccine when she went to the office saying that her dog was having seizures. And the vet said, we're not really sure why she's having seizures. We'll wait and do some tests. But while you're here, we'll give a rabies vaccine. Now, I know that the veterinarian has to give the rabies vaccine. And so this isn't going to be seen as malpractice because she has to. But I think that, to me, that's should be veterinary malpractice. That animal they don't even have a full diagnosis yet.
We had an epileptic dog on the East Coast that was given one of the isoxazolines that produces, seizures and behavioral changes. And the vet said, oh, don't worry about it. If the seizures get worse, just give an anticonvulsant. Yeah.
See, so when we talk about veterinary malpractice, it's not just about going after the ones that are obvious, but the ones that aren't obvious that need to become obvious, if I'm making any sense at all. Because to me, that should be considered veterinary malpractice. And it wouldn't be because they have to give the rabies vaccine. At least that's my understanding. But so we keep fighting and we fight together, all of us.
Yep.
What?
Rabies vaccines the label says only for pets. So if the pet's not healthy, you defer it, okay, while you treat the animal. And if animal control asks the client, the pet is under veterinary medical care at this point for an illness. And at that point, after that, if it's safe enough, it can get the rabies booster. If not, the deferment continues.
Yeah, most states have an exception, like if a veterinarian can actually say that, no, this pet's not healthy, or they should say companion animal is not healthy enough to have this vaccine. But one thing you got to remember too, and not to end on a bad note, is just like consumers here, because small animal companion veterinarians would not exist if it were not for your bond with your animal. I mean, if like Stephen Weiss talks about this, he's a pretty prominent animal attorney. I mean, if it were true that people were interested in the economic value, they would simply throw their animals away, and that's not how we treat them. Consumers of veterinary services need to know that they have a lot more power than they realize, because these businesses would not exist if it were not for you, if you didn't care about your animals. So there's a lot of room to push here. And it really is, I think, as you guys have all mentioned, most people are completely unaware this is happening. And until it happens to them, they are not going to take much interest in it. But when it does, believe me, it's devastating. It is horrific. And the push to make change, becomes very real. So this is everyone who's never had a bad experience. This is their opportunity to make sure that it doesn't happen.
Right. And that's why, we're talking about the documentary. We're trying to raise money for the documentary. I hope anybody listening this will share this everywhere you can possibly share it, on all your social media. Talk about it as much as you can. Please get your friends and family to donate, even $5. We talk about that. There's so many pet owners around in the world that can help us get this documentary made. This documentary will make a difference. It's done by John Bafar, who is an award-winning documentarian. He's won several awards. This is something that we can get picked up, and then that's how we're going to get the laws changed. But without your help, without the help of our attorneys, without the help of our veterinarians, and of course, without our leader, Scott, just keep pushing this through to make Joey's life important and matter, and have something to be able to say. We wouldn't be able to get this done. So I encourage everyone to please donate, and please share this everywhere you can. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and let us go. We went overtime a lot. Thank you so very much, Dr. Dodds and Anna, for answering all of these questions that people have and they're burning. So we just thank you, everybody. Okay.
Sure.
Good.